showing properties and have about 5 minutes to kill in between appointments. So just thought I would come and chat with you guys and explain what the different costs are for buyers and sellers in a transaction. So you'll hear the word closing cost thrown out a lot throughout different transactions, but both for buyers and sellers, they have various different costs. So as a seller, the most common closing cost that you will see is you will have what's called a transfer tax. That's a tax that gets paid to the state and the county. It's a rate, I believe here, it's 4.33 cents per $100 of the sale price of the home. So that's one right off the top. The other thing is what we call an owner's policy of title insurance. So that is another thing that the seller typically pays for in our area. I know different states, different locations, sometimes that is something that the buyer will pay for. And that's why it's always really important to understand that different local markets, or I should say local markets, may do things differently than other areas do. So it's another reason why it's really important to get your information from a reliable source, from a local agent who understands a local market. What are the customs in those local markets? So national news is great for various different things. It's not great to give you an idea of A, what's going on with your local market, and B, what are the local customs in a real estate transaction. So anyway, moving on. Another closing cost for sellers is the commissions. So a lot of the time, again, here in our local market, the commissions for both agents in the transaction, when it's listed in the MLS, is paid out by the seller. And then that commission, it just gets split between a buyer agent and a seller agent, or a listing agent, I should say. That's another one. Another closing cost typically for sellers is the termite inspection. So it's the only inspection typically, again, in our area, that the seller pays for out of their pocket. And, you know, on average, I see they run about $85. Now, if it comes back, there's termite infestation or some other wood boring insect, that is also the seller's responsibility to have that treated. And usually that runs, it can run anywhere from a few hundred. I've seen it run $1,800. It just depends on the extent of the treatment that needs to be done for that. So that's another seller cost. Let's see. Some other seller closing costs are, your taxes. They're prorated to the day of closing. So, and again, this is a local custom that we do here. I know other areas of the country do things a little bit differently. So here locally, the seller pays for their taxes up until they own the property to day of closing, and then the buyer is responsible for everything moving forward. So the title companies will prorate that on the day of closing. So that's kind of your bag of closing costs for a seller. So depending on the price of the house, you know, that could, if it's a $200,000 house, that could run you, with all those things combined, possibly up to $16,000, give or take. Then there's buyer closing costs. So as a buyer, you usually have to have a down payment of some kind. Now, there are loan programs out there that are zero down. That's a topic for another day. But you also have closing costs with the bank. You have property taxes and insurance that you typically have to escrow in if you're financing it. You will have, you'll be responsible for taxes moving forward from, you know, day of closing moving on. So again, that's usually escrowed depending on the time of year that it is. What are some other buyer closing costs? Your home inspections. So depending on if there's a private well, private septic, those kinds of things, a home inspection can run you sometimes a little bit over $1,000. If you're just doing a general home inspection and it's city sewer, city water, sometimes and radon, those kinds of things, you're looking somewhere maybe around $500. So your home inspections are going to be your cost as a buyer. Also, as a buyer, you're going to pay for the appraisal if the lender is requiring an appraisal. So The price on those can range depending on the appraisal management company you're using. But again, I've seen those range in a normal market where appraisers aren't in high demand, anywhere between $500 to $700. When the market was crazy and appraisers, were slammed, I saw some of them over $1,000 if they were a high priority, or they put a stat on them. So those are some typical buyer closing costs. Now, when we are not in a crazy seller's market, sometimes a buyer can ask a seller to pay their closing cost, and there's maximums that a buyer can get from a seller depending on the kind of loan they're using, the down payment they're doing, that kind of thing. But let's just say, for basic math purposes, for a conventional mortgage, you can get about 3% back from a seller. And again, there's a lot of things that go into that number. Sometimes you can get more if you're doing FHA, that kind of thing. But you can get that as a credit from the seller at closing. Now, a lot of buyers, when we're in a really tough market like this and you're having to compete, they may not ask a seller for those closing costs, or they're going to include it in the price of what they're offering. So let's say it's a $100,000 house and they need $3,000 in closing costs. They're actually going to offer $103,000 and ask the seller to give them $3,000 back at closing to help pay their closing costs. So buyers and sellers actually do have closing costs, contrary to what a lot of people think. A lot of people think sellers just get to walk away with this big wad of money, which sometimes they do, but they also have their own closing cost. And then sellers think that buyers don't have any closing cost, and they, as the sellers, are the only ones paying anything out. Not true. Buyers have to bring a lot of money to closing typically. Now, again, there are options to help buyers not have to bring so much money to closing or down payment, that kind of thing. That will be another discussion for another day that I will share in another video. So keep your eyes peeled.